When you stop eating ultra-processed food for 2 weeks, you are not going on a diet. You are disconnecting from the most sophisticated behavior manipulation system ever engineered into a consumer product. Imagine a control panel wired directly into your brain. Not a screen, not an app, a physical panel of switches. One for dopamine, one for hunger, one for mood, one for impulse control, all toggled by food scientists in a laboratory who have never met you and do not need to. Every ultra-processed product you eat sends a precise signal to that panel. The switches flip. You reach for more. The panel was not designed for your satisfaction. It was designed for your return. This isn't just a metaphor. This is your brain on hyper-palatable engineering multiple times a day since you were old enough to hold a packet. The control panel was not installed by accident. It took decades of flavor science, texture optimization, additive chemistry, and neurological research, all pointed at a single outcome, a product you cannot eat just one of. Your inability to stop was never a weakness. It was the intended result. Now imagine what happens the moment you cut the wires. The panel goes dark, the switches stop flipping, and for the first time in possibly years, your brain begins receiving hunger signals from your body instead of purchase signals from a boardroom. That is what these 2 weeks are. Not deprivation, not discipline, a rewiring, a return of signal, a body beginning to hear itself again. Today we are covering 5 things: what ultra-processed food is actually doing inside your body right now, the 2-week biological timeline day by day, the 10 hidden effects nobody connects to ultra-processed food, why the food industry built this system and why nobody stopped them, and 3 pro tips for getting through the first week without quitting. Stay until the effects section. The fatigue, the mood swings, the skin problems, the weight that will not move, every single one of it connects back to what is in those packets. Let's start the clock. Before the clock starts, you need to understand what ultra-processed food is and what it is doing inside you right now. Because this is not about junk food. This is about a category of product engineered at the molecular level to override your biology. Ultra-processed food is defined by the NOVA classification system, developed by researchers at the University of Sao Paulo, as food that has undergone industrial processing so extensive that it bears no resemblance to the original ingredients. These are not foods with added salt or sugar. These are formulations, combinations of industrial ingredients, emulsifiers, flavor enhancers, modified starches, hydrogenated fats, artificial colors, sweeteners, and preservatives, assembled to produce a specific neurological and behavioral response. The first mechanism is dopamine hijacking. Ultra-processed food is engineered to hit the bliss point, the precise combination of fat, sugar, and salt at which dopamine release is maximized. This is not an accident of flavor, it is a formula. A 2018 study published in Cell Metabolism demonstrated that ultra-processed foods activate the same dopamine reward pathways as addictive substances at comparable intensities. Your brain does not distinguish between the reward signal from a packet of crisps and the reward signal from a behavior it has been conditioned to repeat obsessively. Both hijack the same system. The second mechanism is gut destruction. Your gut lining is protected by a mucus layer maintained by a diverse microbiome. Ultra-processed food contains emulsifiers, specifically polysorbate 80 and carboxymethylcellulose, found in virtually every processed food product, that have been shown in peer-reviewed research to degrade this mucus layer directly. A 2015 study published in Nature found that these common food emulsifiers disrupted the gut microbiome and induced chronic, low-grade intestinal inflammation in animal models, at concentrations found in normally consumed quantities of processed food. Your gut is not struggling because you have a sensitive digestive system. It is struggling because specific additives are dismantling its protective architecture. The third mechanism is appetite signal destruction. Ultra-processed food is specifically engineered to be calorie-dense and nutritionally hollow. It bypasses your satiety systems by delivering calories without the fiber, protein, and micronutrient content that triggers fullness signals. Simultaneously, the flavor engineering drives continuous eating behavior, the so-called vanishing caloric density effect, where food engineered to dissolve quickly tricks the brain into registering less consumption than actually occurred. You are not overeating because you lack self-control. You are overeating because the product was engineered to make accurate calorie tracking neurologically impossible. The fourth mechanism is systemic inflammation. Additives, preservatives, artificial colors, and the refined carbohydrates in ultra-processed food drive a continuous, low-grade inflammatory state through multiple simultaneous pathways: gut permeability, microbiome disruption, advanced glycation end products from refined sugar, and direct inflammatory signaling from chemical additives. This inflammation suppresses your immune system, disrupts your hormones, degrades your cognition, and accelerates cellular aging. The control panel never stops sending signals until you cut the wires. Now the clock begins. Here is exactly what happens inside your body day by day when you remove ultra-processed food. Days 1 to 3, withdrawal and the signal storm. In the first 3 days, your brain will protest loudly. The dopamine pathways that have been receiving engineered stimulation multiple times per day suddenly receive nothing. Your nucleus accumbens, the brain's reward center, registers the absence of its usual signal. Cravings fire intensely, irritability rises, concentration drops, headaches are common, energy feels flat. This is not your body telling you it needs ultra-processed food. This is your reward system going through withdrawal from engineered stimulation. The severity of what you feel in days 1 to 3 is a direct measurement of how thoroughly the control panel had been activated. The worse it feels, the deeper the rewiring that is about to occur. Your gut microbiome begins noticing the change within 24 hours. The absence of emulsifiers means the mucus layer degradation stops. Gut bacteria that were being suppressed by additive-laden food begin the earliest stages of recovery. This is invisible and unfelt, but it has begun. If you push through this, a fascinating shift occurs. Days 3 to 5, the blood sugar floor stabilizes. By day 3 to 5, the absence of refined carbohydrates and added sugars that constitute the bulk of ultra-processed food calories begins to show in your blood glucose pattern. The spike crash cycle, which has been driving your energy, mood, and hunger throughout the day, begins to flatten. Your insulin response begins to recalibrate. Without the relentless refined carbohydrate load, your pancreas is no longer firing emergency insulin responses multiple times per day. Cells that had begun developing insulin resistance, stopping responding to insulin's signal, begin to recover sensitivity as the chronic signaling pressure reduces. The 3 p.m. energy crash begins to disappear, not because you have more willpower in the afternoon, but because the blood glucose floor has stabilized and there is no insulin-driven crash to produce the collapse. Many people notice this shift clearly around day 4, a sustained afternoon energy that they had assumed was simply not available to them. If you push through this, a fascinating shift occurs. Days 5 to 7, gut lining begins repairing. By day 5 to 7, the gut microbiome shift is accelerating. Without emulsifiers continuously degrading the intestinal mucus layer, beneficial bacteria, specifically Akkermansia muciniphila, the species most associated with gut barrier integrity, begin to recover population and begin producing mucins that rebuild the protective layer. A 2022 study published in Gut Microbiota Research confirmed that Akkermansia muciniphila levels began recovering measurably within 5 to 7 days of removing ultra-processed food from the diet, with corresponding improvements in intestinal permeability markers. Your serotonin production begins to improve. Approximately 90% of your serotonin is produced in the gut. As the gut lining heals and beneficial bacteria recover, serotonin precursor production increases. The mood improvement that many people notice in week 1 is not psychological motivation. It is a measurable neurochemical shift driven by gut repair. Many people notice reduced bloating, less digestive discomfort, and an improvement in bowel regularity in this window. Not from a probiotic supplement, but from removing the additives that were disrupting the system. But here is where the science gets truly shocking. Days 7 to 10, dopamine receptors begin recovering. Now we arrive at the most important neurological shift of the 2 weeks. By day 7 to 10, your dopamine receptor sensitivity begins to upregulate. The receptors that were repeatedly flooded by engineered hyperpalatable stimulation begin to rebuild their responsiveness. Real food begins to taste different. Fruit tastes sweeter. Vegetables have flavor. A meal cooked from whole ingredients produces satisfaction that engineered food had suppressed, because your reward threshold is recalibrating downward toward what your biology was designed to respond to. A 2021 study published in Appetite found that dopamine receptor sensitivity to natural food rewards began measurably recovering within 7 to 10 days of removing ultra-processed food, with participants reporting significantly increased satisfaction from unprocessed meals. Your impulse control improves simultaneously. The prefrontal cortex, the brain's decision-making and impulse regulation center, is directly impaired by the chronic dopamine flooding of engineered food. As the flooding reduces, prefrontal function recovers. Decisions feel less impulsive. Cravings feel less overwhelming. The control panel is losing its signal strength. But here is where the science gets truly shocking. Days 10 to 14, systemic inflammation reduces, full system recalibration. By days 10 to 14, the compounding effect of gut repair, dopamine recovery, blood glucose stabilization, and additive removal produces measurable systemic changes that go well beyond digestion. Inflammatory markers, specifically C-reactive protein and interleukin-6, begin to drop measurably. A 2019 randomized controlled trial published in Cell demonstrated that switching from an ultra-processed diet to an unprocessed diet produced significant reductions in inflammatory biomarkers within 2 weeks, with participants consuming an average of 500 fewer calories per day without any instruction to restrict intake, purely as a result of restored satiety signaling. Your skin begins to change. The reduction in advanced glycation end products from refined sugar, the reduction in inflammatory cytokines, and the improvement in gut integrity, which reduces bacterial fragments entering the bloodstream and triggering systemic inflammation, all converge on skin quality. Less baseline redness, clearer texture, faster healing. Your cognitive function improves measurably. The combination of stable blood glucose, reduced neuroinflammation from gut permeability improvement, and dopamine receptor recovery produces improvements in working memory, processing speed, and attention span that many people describe as the brain feeling accessible again after being behind glass. Most significantly, your relationship with hunger changes completely. For the first time in possibly years, you feel hungry at appropriate intervals. The hunger resolves with an appropriate amount of real food, and the meal satisfies. The control panel has lost its power. Your body is sending the signals, and you are receiving them clearly. The 10 hidden effects. Now the 10 effects. Every single one is something you have been living with and blaming on the wrong cause. Effect 10. The constant low-grade fatigue you blame on not sleeping enough or working too hard. Refined carbohydrates in ultra-processed food create blood glucose instability that requires constant hormonal management. Cortisol and adrenaline released repeatedly to correct the crashes. This hormonal cycling exhausts your adrenal system. Without the glucose roller coaster, adrenal demand drops. Energy becomes stable and sustained for the first time. Effect 9. The mood instability and irritability you blame on stress or personality. Your mood is directly regulated by blood glucose, gut-derived serotonin, and dopamine receptor sensitivity. All three are systematically disrupted by ultra-processed food through separate mechanisms. Without the disruption, all three begin to stabilize simultaneously. The irritability that felt like your personality was the product of three simultaneous neurochemical dysregulations. Effect 8. The persistent bloating and digestive discomfort you blame on food intolerances. Emulsifiers in ultra-processed food degrade the intestinal mucus layer and disrupt the tight junction proteins that seal the gut wall. The bloating, gas, and discomfort are symptoms of an inflamed, structurally compromised gut, not specific food intolerances. Remove the emulsifiers and the structural repair begins. The discomfort reduces without eliminating gluten, dairy, or any other specific food group. Effect 7. The skin problems, acne, redness, uneven texture, you blame on hormones or genetics. Advanced glycation end products from refined sugar directly degrade collagen and trigger inflammatory signaling in the skin. Gut permeability from emulsifier damage allows bacterial lipopolysaccharides to enter the bloodstream and trigger systemic inflammation that expresses in the skin. Remove the source of both processes, and skin inflammatory markers reduce within days. Effect 6. The inability to concentrate and the brain fog you blame on screens or poor sleep. Neuroinflammation from gut-derived bacterial fragments entering the bloodstream via leaky gut directly impairs hippocampal function, the brain region responsible for focus, working memory, and learning. This is called the gut-brain inflammatory axis. As gut permeability reduces and bacterial translocation stops, neuroinflammation reduces. The fog that lifted by day 10 was not motivation. It was a reduction in direct brain inflammation. Effect 5. The weight that does not move despite caloric restriction. Ultra-processed food dysregulates leptin, your fullness hormone, by chronically elevating insulin and driving adipose inflammation that makes fat cells leptin resistant. Your fat cells are producing leptin, but your brain is not receiving the signal. The caloric restriction fails because the satiety system is broken, not because you lack discipline. As insulin normalizes and adipose inflammation reduces, leptin sensitivity restores. Satiety signals reach the brain. Spontaneous caloric intake reduces without restriction. Effect 4. The frequent illness and slow recovery you blame on a weak immune system. Gut permeability from emulsifier damage allows bacterial endotoxins, lipopolysaccharides from gut bacteria, to enter the bloodstream continuously. This produces a chronic, low-grade immune activation that exhausts your adaptive immune system's precision while keeping its inflammatory arm constantly engaged. Remove the gut permeability driver, and the chronic endotoxin load drops. Your immune system stops fighting the wrong battle and becomes available for the right ones. Effect 3. The anxiety and low mood that medication has not fully resolved. Your gut produces 90% of your serotonin and significant quantities of GABA, your primary calming neurotransmitter. Gut dysbiosis from ultra-processed food disrupts both production pathways. A 2020 meta-analysis published in Molecular Psychiatry found that dietary ultra-processing was independently associated with a 44% increased risk of depression and anxiety, a stronger association than many individual nutrient deficiencies. The mood disorder that has been treated pharmacologically may have a dietary driver that has never been addressed. Effect 2. The uncontrollable cravings and eating beyond fullness you blame on lack of willpower. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for impulse regulation, is directly impaired by the chronic dopamine flooding of ultra-processed food. Simultaneously, leptin resistance prevents fullness signals from reaching the hypothalamus, and the vanishing caloric density effect prevents accurate consumption tracking. 3 separate mechanisms operating simultaneously produce eating behavior that feels uncontrollable because, neurologically, it largely is. This is not a character flaw. It is a 3-system failure engineered into the product. Effect 1. The sense that food has power over you, that you are not in control of what you eat, when you eat, or how much. The control panel was real. It was wired into your dopamine system, your gut signaling, your blood glucose, and your satiety hormones simultaneously. You were not weak. You were operating multiple compromised systems at once while being told the problem was you. At day 14, the panel goes dark. Your hunger returns, your satiety works, your reward system responds to real food. The signals are yours again. For the first time, you are the one deciding, not the product. Now here's the part that should make you angry. The ultra-processed food industry spent over 3 decades and billions of dollars funding nutrition research that focused on individual nutrients, fat, sugar, sodium, calories, while systematically avoiding research into the effects of food processing itself. By focusing the scientific and public debate on nutrients, the industry ensured that the category of ultra-processed food as a distinct health threat never entered mainstream nutritional thinking. This was not an oversight. It was a strategy documented in internal industry communications, obtained through litigation, and published in peer-reviewed journals, including PLOS Medicine in 2019. The NOVA classification system, which identified ultra-processed food as a distinct and harmful category, was developed independently by researchers with no food industry funding. When it was published, the food industry lobby funded multiple counter-analyses designed to discredit the classification system itself rather than address the findings. These counter-analyses were published in journals that received food industry advertising revenue. This is documented. Ultra-processed food now represents approximately 60% of calories consumed in the United States, 57% in the United Kingdom, and over 50% in most developed nations. The companies that manufacture these products, including Nestle, Unilever, PepsiCo, Kraft Heinz, and General Mills, collectively generate over $1 trillion in annual revenue. A finding that their core product category is systematically harmful to human biology is not a regulatory risk. It is an existential one. The conditions that ultra-processed food drives, obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, depression, anxiety, and inflammatory bowel conditions generate trillions of dollars in annual pharmaceutical and medical management revenue. The dietary driver has been obscured by the same funding capture that obscured the sugar science and the seed oil science before it. They did not hide this because the science was wrong. They hid it because the science works. 3 tips to get through 2 weeks without quitting. Tip 1. Replace the packet, not the meal. The most common failure point in the first week is not temptation, it is the absence of convenience. Ultra-processed food dominates because it requires zero preparation time. The replacement is not a complex whole food meal that takes an hour to cook. It is a simple swap: eggs instead of a breakfast bar, rice and tinned fish instead of a microwave meal, fruit and nuts instead of a packet of crisps. The preparation time difference is minutes. The biological difference is total. Identify your 3 most frequent ultra-processed meals and find a single simple swap for each one before day 1 begins. Remove the decision from the moment of hunger. Tip 2. Manage the day 3 wall with protein and fat. The withdrawal symptoms of days 1 to 3 are driven primarily by 2 mechanisms: dopamine signal absence and blood glucose destabilization from the removal of refined carbohydrates. Both are dramatically reduced by eating adequate protein, at least 30 grams per meal, and including fat from whole sources. Protein stabilizes blood glucose without the insulin spike of refined carbohydrates. Fat triggers the satiety hormones that ultra-processed food bypasses. A meal of eggs, meat, fish, or legumes with natural fat from olive oil, butter, or avocado will dramatically reduce the craving intensity of days 1 to 3. The withdrawal is real. The duration is short. The protein and fat are the bridge. Tip 3. Do not read the label, read the ingredient count. Identifying ultra-processed food does not require understanding food chemistry. The single most reliable indicator is ingredient count and ingredient recognizability. A whole food has 1 ingredient or none. A minimally processed food has 2 to 5 ingredients you could name and find in a kitchen. An ultra-processed food has 15 or more ingredients, several of which cannot be purchased in any shop and exist only as industrial additives. If you cannot picture the ingredient existing in nature, it is an additive. If there are more than 5 ingredients and several are unrecognizable, put it back. This rule requires no nutritional knowledge. It requires only the ability to count and to ask, does this ingredient exist in a kitchen? 2 weeks. That is all they were betting you would never survive without their product. You now know the fatigue is adrenal cycling from glucose instability. The bloating is emulsifier damage to your gut lining. The cravings are engineered dopamine signals. The brain fog is gut-derived neuroinflammation. The mood swings are three simultaneous neurotransmitter disruptions. You cannot be fooled by any of it anymore. Cut, clear, reclaim. You are not giving up convenience food. You are disconnecting a control panel that was never yours, that was designed by people whose only interest was your return visit, your repeat purchase, and your lifelong dependency on a product that required your biology to be compromised to function as designed. If you are starting today, comment Day 1 below. Every person who comments is someone else who now knows what is in the packet and why it was designed that way. And subscribe. Next, we are covering what happens to your body when you stop drinking alcohol for 30 days. The neurological recovery is faster than any doctor will tell you. You need to see it before your next drink.